Well, welcome to the. I don't know if it starts after she finishes speaking or if it during when she starts, like
We
just when she
can
starts speaking.
we
It's
can
the
roll from the
story of
top.
The Apprentice, but no, we can't. No edits. Story of The Apprentice podcast. It's been a minute since we've done this. I'm gonna change my name. Hold on.
Mhm.
Story of the Apprentice podcast. That's too many S's. The Apprentice podcast. I am one host, Jesse T. William. And with me, as always, I can't do the bit because the sun's out.
Uh, Tunker Punkerson.
Dunker Punkerson. Um, Tunker Punkerson, why are we here today?
And we're here to talk about D&D. The first time in a couple weeks.
A couple weeks. Okay. I had a spicy thought. And it's the one that
Mm,
that is on my mind right now. I went through
really
notes.
like
I
spicy
have a
talk.
big notebook, as you can see clearly here.
Yeah.
Just my fingers. That's pretty impressive, like how well it just.
Yeah, blends in.
Anyways,
I
that's
think if
actually
you held it
crazy.
like in front of your face like this, you could see like the okay. Yeah. See, you get it the thickness. Oh.
Anyways, um, so I watched the Critical Roles. I watched the Critical Roles.
Mhm.
I've had a series of thoughts. I'm gonna write one down. I think I've started working on a secret system. Since
Secret
we
system.
have we talked about that?
I think we
I mean, like
talked
since I
about
started
it
working on it.
not since you started working on it, I think.
Okay.
I think we've talked about it a little bit. I know you and I have talked about it,
hmm
but on the podcast, I think maybe it was talked about a bit a while ago.
well, okay. I'm gonna start with Critical Role. Um, uh, I watched the Critical Roles. I like it mostly. I feel, and I don't want to, because I don't know. Um, I'm being careful with my words because Critical Role fans are rabid. But
I could I I'll say something. I'll take a
say
heat.
something spicy.
I do not give a single shit about Critical Role, nor have I ever. I'm sure, look, I've seen a bit. It's fine. I just don't think it's like
Here's
it's fine.
here's
It's all right.
here's my problem. And I don't want anyone in the comments saying it's just their home game, but public. That's not the point here. Um, there are aspects of the game that Matt is really bad as a storyteller, and one of those aspects is travel. One of the most infuriating things for me is how that show handles travel. It's so fucking boring. They will have like an episode or two of just traveling, and it's Matt going, Liam, roll a d20. Oh, 5. Okay. The wind is strong today, and you lose a day of travel. That's not anything. That's not a thing. Like not to say that that doesn't happen, that things don't occur that like slow down travel, but like that is not a compelling aspect of the game. And what I want to talk about was what I and not to like put myself, I don't want to use this to be like I do this thing and I view it as being better than Matt, so therefore I'm better than Matt. It's not the case. That being said, um I run more D&D than Matt. I run a lot more D&D than Matt does. Um like by the end of this year, um with because Critical Role has like a lot of episodes of content. They have around 50 plus 150, 300. So no, in a couple of weeks, actually, hold on. Sorry, I'm
I would
having
math.
so many stems of thought. But in a couple of weeks, I'm getting close right now. But in a couple of weeks, I will have run more sessions of D&D than there in the last like 8 to 10 months than Critical Role has had episodes in the last 8 years.
Mm.
Um, I want to too many things. I This is such a silly little thing for me to do. Um, uh, I just want to know how many games I have run. Um, and I don't know how to check that. Oh, I know how to check that. Uh, okay, give me. This is the most entertaining thing for our listeners.
It
Um,
absolutely is.
Tucker, say something. Another crazy thing about.
Something crazy. Something crazy. Fuck.
I found the
Something, I
number. It's
need something
okay.
spicy. Controversial.
307 games in the
Mm.
past however, yeah, and by next week it'll be 320. The week after that it might be 335 because I've just added um uh two more games to my schedule, but I've taken one off. But also, anyways, those are just professional games. Then there's still my home game, which has gone on, it itself has gone on for like 2.5 years at this point. Anyways, what I
I
do
have
with
grave
travel,
concerns for your health.
nah, what I do with travel, um, I use it to explore themes, and like I use it to world build, like how and I use it to like expand the story. So like if characters need to get from like point A to point B, and say it's going to take like a really long time, like you can still tell the story between destinations. You
Mhm.
don't need to um have everything um be in set locations. And for example, so like the first time a player made me aware that this was a good thing I do, um, in the Folia series of campaigns, it was like a lot of travel that these characters had to do, and so each episode was like an exploration of how the thing that they are dealing with has affected like the surrounding areas. So rather than just like, oh, here's some random encounters, it's like here are encounters with this cult, and here's so you're in a small town, and there's a cultist who's trying to like recruit people and change their minds about like ongoing events and influence things. The next session was like you're going up a river, and you see people um like kind of following, and you see these like crystal glimmers of like creatures moving around, and you see that like this territory is kind of infested. And then you meet a character, and there's so many things that you can do during travel that isn't just like you fight a basilisk. And I know that like again some people enjoy that, but I think as a storyteller, like when that is what you are doing as a professional, like in a professional setting, again, I understand it's their home game, but like as a professional storyteller, there are better ways to use the game. And I think that's also the reason I am building my own system, is because D&D as a system like pushes or like the default is that kind of more boring like style of
And then
gameplay.
you fight this thing.
You fight you
You talk to these guys and then you fight this thing, and then the thing is fought, and the problem is now solved.
Yeah, yeah. And
I
especially with travel.
I with travel. Okay, so I have like this really like specific way that I handle that. However, this doesn't like work for every party. Some parties are not very receptive to the thing that I do, and so it's not something I do. Like if they're a party that enjoys a bit of combat, like maybe I'll try and throw something in. Otherwise, I'm just not going to do it because I am not going to enjoy it. However, I don't always like necessarily like because I agree with you that there are ways to tell the story through travel. But sometimes it's not even about like for me like telling or like adding something to the bigger story. I took a lot of like when it comes to storytelling, I've taken a lot of notes like from other pieces of media, and something that like really stuck with me at a young age when I started writing in general was I remember I had heard somebody like talking about like Avatar: The Last Airbender and the way that that show handles filler episodes, and about how it never really feels like filler, besides like maybe one or two episodes, is because in the process you're always learning something important about the characters themselves. And so oftentimes when I'm kind of at a point where like things there's kind of a lull or we're just traveling, um, it's always a really good opportunity for me to introduce a smaller, unrelated problem or thing for them to do that showcases or helps like the players explore the characters and the way they interact with the world and who they are as people outside of the main problem. Um, and that is something that's been very helpful for me. It doesn't work with every party because
Some players just
some
don't engage
yeah
with that.
they
Yeah.
don't like connect with their characters in that way. It's not this kind of like full built out person, you know. And it just like so some people just aren't as invested, but with the parties that it works with, it really works with, and it's a lot of fun. And it gives them again an opportunity to explore who the character actually is, um outside of like this big issue that's happening, which is really good for creating like I guess like solid like individual personalities amongst a party instead of like this is our main goal as a party and we're all working towards this, like
Mhm.
everybody kind of like having a distinct identity within the party. I It's something I really like doing. So when a party's receptive to it, I really enjoy it, and so that's usually how I utilize travel within. But that doesn't always happen. Sometimes I'm doing the same thing and I'm kind of using the like story is still happening within travel. Things are still going on.
Mhm. Yeah, I find with character for me is so strange because I have such like a large amount of players, and every player has such a different way of approaching or not approaching character. And like some people are very good at just pushing their characters along, and as events go on, developing them and like having an internal kind of idea of what they're thinking about and experiencing, and will kind of find moments to express that. And then there's some characters who really don't, like, aren't emotionally grounded in the world. We've kind of talked about that before, like the different
Mm-hmm.
kinds of players. But you have this strange I have this strange thing where most of my parties are of like mixed, like not opportunity, but like mixed experience in character. And what I have found is that there are some things that would be good for characters that just don't work for everyone in a party. And it gets like very, very notable when some people are engaging with a thing and others aren't. So you kind of have to constantly ride this middle line of like what is the optimum route for the enjoyment of everyone as a collective, and how do you give little moments to people without like giving someone something that they can't handle. um there's so many like layers to this too, because it a lot of it comes down to, or at least in one particular case that I'm thinking of right now, comes down to how grounded the character is in the world. Because in for example the Fulian series of campaigns, that world is very challenging. There's a lot going on, and people have um challenges in a challenging world. I'm good with words,
Yeah, super
but
articulate.
yeah, I am so articulate. Yeah, like people have like serious obstacles that they've overcome, and so to use it an example of like a really good party, Funky Cool, um, uh, how most of the characters use what has happened before, um, the events that they've experienced in game to like weigh them down, and sort of keep them grounded, um, which just doesn't happen for every person. And again, there's a million reasons. Like some people don't really pay attention that much, or don't have that kind of like long term uh, um, memory or investment or whatever it is. But I think the reason I'm thinking about this right now is because the longer this particular story goes on, it only has another like 12 or so sessions. The longer it goes on, the more those differences become apparent, because the story is coming to a head where like we had a three-way cross we had yeah we had a three-way crossover last week, so three different parties across three different sessions doing a bunch of shit together, and you were part of it. And then starting this week, like my week's starting on Friday, starting on Friday, or like very shortly, um, we'll have two three-way crossovers in the setting. One of them might turn into a four-way crossover. So the characters who are not as invested but still have equal influence on the story as a whole, I'm beginning to worry about, because it's like like players will talk about things and or like message me about ideas, and you can tell that they don't really understand what they're asking for. um or really, again, this is one particular instance, um that's put me in a position of like, if this person like has they're going to be put in a position where they could make, as a player, a really um difficult decision that, if the character had really been there for all the events, would think twice about. Um,
Mm,
but yeah, it's just like the stakes are not only high from a like narrative perspective, but from a like social perspective, there are 40 people who can hinge on one bad decision. And I think here's what I'm trying to get at. When a player is not grounded in their character and they make a bad decision, it's not a character making a bad decision that everyone has to live with. That's always okay. I prefer it if a player goes, oh, I think this character is going to make a bad decision. You're like, yes. But when a player makes a bad decision just as a player, because they are not that invested, I begin to worry.
mm,
I'm beginning to worry about the potential of that. We'll see how it goes, but yeah, that's a thought.
mm. I feel like there was something you said in the middle of that like stirred a thought within me. I can't quite remember what it was. Um, I feel like while I haven't experienced that on like the DM side, because I'm just getting started. I definitely feel like there is a sense like I suppose in some of the crossovers, like I can kind of like notice things like that happening. I actually think I'm guilty of it on occasion. Um or maybe not like guilty of like the bad decision making. Um uh, oh, I because okay, I remember where this was going. and I'm also very articulate. Shut the fuck up. Where
Shut the
like I
fuck
was,
up, listener. Don't talk about
Mia,
how
be quiet. um, where because I was thinking about, okay, wait, it's gone. This is what happened, folks at
okay,
home.
crossover
This is what
and
happens when you don't get enough sleep.
mm,
Um, please, for the love of God, get enough sleep. Elijah, I know you're listening to this. Get some
Elijah, get some
fucking
fucking
sleep.
sleep.
Go to bed.
Go to
Uh,
fucking bed right now. You're up too late.
he
Um,
is, but so like with the crossover and with because I wasn't thinking about like the bad decision part. I was thinking about like just to help me out here. the
the lack of like being grounded in a character
or
or
like and not being grounded in the character. Because I was gonna say, I feel like I'm partially guilty of this sometimes, but I don't feel not grounded in my character. I don't think that's the problem.
mm,
When we're talking about like the way that parties like
the other
when there's people who are like not as invested, there can the cohesion within the party, you know what I
yeah.
mean? And
Well,
sometimes decisions that they make is not good
mhm,
for um and like so I feel sometimes I feel very or at least like this is how it is like from my perspective. And this is like not an always thing, but it's something that I've noticed in players too, depending on the player. Some people are like, fuck it, I'm gonna do whatever. But like on occasion you get somebody who like there is a realization of like, okay, this is like not beneficial. I'm going to make the conscious choice to fall in line. And kind of uh what's the word? Um Starts with an R, but I can't but like kind of acquiesce to the rest of the whatever they're gonna do, I'm gonna do, and whatever's happening there, I'm kind of like following along. Um, and so I think that like eventually you get to a certain point when you get like really into the nitty gritty of the storytelling, where like the people who have like a very strong sense of like character and like are very good with that and are very grounded in the world are going to start making the big decisions, and the people who are not as strong in that are kind of just going along
mhm,
and letting whatever happens. And I even have a couple players like that.
mhm. um I think partially there's also so like with the games I run, there is a very complicated like not just like a tight wire act, but like it's like a tight wire web where a bunch of the strings are not actually supported. So like you have to like walk the tight wire and also like choose which wires to like step on that will get you to the other side. And with this crossover specifically, um, there's a couple of things I've noticed from running these like large sessions, which is ultimately every session in my mind has a goal. Sometimes I don't explain that to the players. So the very first crossover I did, um, the players start talking to each other and the role play is good, but it's like we have a thing to get to, and you're not talking about anything in particular. And this was a very big thing. And the first crossover lasted like 5 weeks across 10 sessions. And it was like we did not have time for a lot of things. Um, but even with uh, um, last Wednesday morning's crossover, I wanted that to be a thematic crossover. I wanted it to touch on the like relation between the characters um and how they're feeling the same things. Um and what I did on Sunday that worked is because I started off the session and I was like, this is about hope. and stuff. Um, and people explored hope. But on the Wednesday session, I did the thing that I do a lot, which was I gave a prompt. I was like, here's the context for the question. So you've experienced this amount of difficulty and loss. Because I also had a player specifically message me about what they thought their character was feeling after a particular event. So it's like you've experienced these things, you're having a bad time. What does that look like? And I don't really feel like it landed super well on that Wednesday session. I didn't really feel like it touched base. And yeah, I was struggling. Um, and I noticed that the players were like on the other side were like, we should go deal with this problem, right? And I was like, you should talk to each other. I was expecting bunky energy, and we didn't quite get there. Um, but that's okay. I mean, again, it's always like you as a DM need to provide your players with like the frame and the tool to, if you want them to do something specific, um, or if because like I think especially with crossovers, I mean, some people are it felt like the other party was cognizant of the fact that there were other people who are here for a limited time. So some of them were trying to be like, well, it makes sense that the thing we do is deal with this problem. Um,
Mm,
uh, where that wasn't necessarily the purpose of that particular session. And
mm,
also like might have been a TPK depending on the roles because the creature that they were dealing with very well, no, I guess some of the anyways, not beside the point. So all that to say, D&D is hard to run. Um,
D&D is hard to run.
it's so complicated. You never like if you're a DM out there listening and you're worried about getting it right because I see like I back when I was making TikToks a lot more consistently, people would always ask me like, I would talk about something complicated that I'm doing, and people are like will always express fears about failing or doing things wrong or whatever, and it's like I regularly um make so many mistakes or don't
Mm,
run things ideally. I mean, like just based off of the frequency that I run things and the amount of energy that I have, if I don't like feed myself properly in a day, um, my some of my sessions might not be as strong because sometimes there's just so many things that go into it. It takes so much work and so much practice to be able to
yeah.
get it
But
right.
it's not even always about the DM either.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes you jump into a session and just like one or two people have not had a good day. And it does like
Yeah.
kind of permeate the energy, which nobody should necessarily feel like bad about that because like it happens sometimes, you know.
Hmm.
But it's and sometimes somebody's had a bad day and it doesn't really affect anything, you know, and it just
Hmm.
really depends on the people there and like the way they interact and the way they know each other and the kind of day that they've had and their energy levels as well. There's so many different when there's so many different people collaborating on something together because that's what D&D is. I can do so much fucking work, but at the end of the day, it still doesn't work if my players are not working with me. It just
Yeah.
doesn't. So like it I could do so much and it could still not matter sometimes. Um, but like when there's so many different individuals involved in like a process in this collaborative story, um, I don't know. Humans are weird. Shit happens.
And
Some things don't go the
also
way you want all the time.
when in my case, I run very narrative driven games. The point of the games is not to beat the monster, but to tell a story, right? and I do the monsters and stuff. I'm very good at doing the monsters. I have a fun story about a very scary monster. Um, but the players who come in, for the most part, are not storytellers. The vast majority of my players are not storytellers. They're just people, and that is, I think, that's the main point of contention, and
Mm.
not even a thing that I'm like upset about. The thing I just struggle with is that I my GM style works best for people who have storytelling skills, and um, I do what I can to give like natural kind of setups within the context of the game for people to tell a story, but not everyone knows how. Um, uh, there are some people who are just, I mean, I don't want to say that because for the most part, that's not true about most of the players that I have. I did have a game. So I mentioned this a couple of weeks ago, and one of the players, a player we share, commented, it was I was talking about a game that Elijah was in that he was basically saving, and how I these players weren't great players, and Thomas, who is a good player and who's in three of my games and one of yours, I think
I love
commented,
Thomas.
yeah.
Shout out
I
Thomas.
he was like, I hope it's not me, and I was like, I want to message you just to be like, it's not, but as I don't have that kind of energy to do that. And also, then I feel like I would be going around messaging every player but the ones who have, yeah,
Eventually, people would start. So sorry,
yeah.
guys. You gotta keep it big.
But I
If it
fucking
makes you
canceled
feel
that
any better,
game.
Thomas, I love you.
Thomas is one of those players. He's very much like um not very much like David because they're very distinct in their play style.
Mm.
And Thomas does is a bit more emotionally grounded than David is. But David also had, I want to talk about both of them because both I Thomas
Which
generally as
which
the
David are we speaking
older
of?
David.
Okay.
Um, but anyways, so I had three players out of a game of five who just, one was, to be fair, one was super new to D&D and jumping into a high
Mm-hmm.
level campaign wasn't their fault. Um, uh,
Yeah, that's rough.
the only thing they did wrong was joining a game that was listed for intermediate um, uh, players. And they liked role playing, and that was fine. But just like, you know, as a storyteller, it wasn't a storyteller, and that's fine. But the other two players were like D&D veterans and could not carry a scene, could not. I you had to force it. It was such a nightmare for me. And it just got to a point where I was like, I cannot. Again, this week, um, it's now only two campaigns in that setting, but it would have been three campaigns all in the same place, having a long narrative crossover and after a very intense battle and like a big shift within the setting, and like reflecting on everything lost to get whatever, all this stuff, and giving those players equal narrative reins as everyone else who is invested, was just not something that I felt good about doing. I just didn't
Mm.
like running that game, so I had to end it, and I did. But so David had a moment in the so it was very interesting for me because he was talking about um one of his first character in my games. So he is this it started off, I'll do spark notes of this character, but basically started off as a like follower of the goddess of life, a keeper of balance, so traveled around the country doing good things. And unbeknownst to him, he was corrupted at the start of the campaign, and then um, came to reconcile with that within the first couple of sessions with another player or a character, and then started working against it, and was very much like in in theme, like for like a large portion of this the campaign, like understood the themes of what needed to be communicated, or like what the point of the story was, and was like very on top of it. Because essentially it's like the this corruption within the setting, corruption of faith specifically, spreads through like the flaws in that faith. And so the kind of point of this story is to criticize but reaffirm faith, like find better ways through. And this is someone who's like also, I just feel weird talking about this because I myself am someone who's like agnostic. I don't really care any beliefs about any religions. So I just feel like sometimes when I explain the themes of the setting, it feels like I'm like pandering to be like, hey, have you thought about your faith? So just to clear the air about that. But anyways, so the character has been, with his position in the story as a keeper of balance and follower of life, and what that means, has played that role very well in de-escalating a lot of conflicts, or attempting to de-escalate
Mm,
conflicts, even when, like, he's not like a young Elijah level of role player. um but when something's like laid out, he gets it. And so um his words or his actions through the like story have like carried weight in like the back of my mind. And he'd like been joking for a while about Ian, his character, being a saint. But I from either the first time he mentioned it or before, I was like very genuinely being like, yeah, he'll probably be a saint. Like, it makes sense. Like, he's this extremely important figure. um and so the first step in that process happened last session, where they came to this thing. you know, there's also kind of a theme in the setting about like redemption, um, between, like, Affadil died, obviously, but like people like Affadil and like other corrupted people, Abizat, although he wasn't corrupted, he had this like sense of belonging to this place. And Madrimit, and even Aurelius, which it was sucks that that character wasn't there for that session. But they like hit all the right notes, and said all the right things to a specific person, to like humanize them, outside of the context of the cult, um, and with a like pretty good role, um, like convince this person to just like leave it behind. Things are crazy right now. Walk away. And did that. And I kind of I gave him the first step. I asked him, I was like, you can either raise your charisma from like 14 to 20, or your wisdom, because he's a cleric, wisdom from 20 to 22. Um, but anyways, so I had the thought to talk about this earlier, in relation to giving people the narrative reins, um, because you also like inherently you look to reward players for what they do. You like, in the process of collaboration, you hand them something, you hand you something back, you hand them something back, so on and so forth, until the game ends. And
mhm.
um at some point, the thing you are handing them back are like large scale effects of the world, is like their influence, and um the like consequences of their like right choices, as well. um I am definitely a DM who doesn't just seek to thwart um characters, but when players or characters have a really good idea or like opportunity, I like try to like, with that is like a positive rather than like an evil twist. I try to like put that forth.
Mm, mm.
um But anyways, so I forget what my original point was. Something about rewarding players. But David was like a good example of like long-term investment that was like rewarding. And
Yeah. Because we were talking about Thomas, and then
yeah, I was gonna talk about uh Thomas. He's just generally like very invested. In a way like very meaningfully invested. Um and he had a great moment in the last session. There's a little battle like way up north in Falia. Um and he just made a suboptimal choice that was a character choice of
mm,
like my
I
character
love
is
character
scared.
choices.
My character's gonna run. And I was like, that's sick. I'm glad. I'm glad that there's like it's always very nice when a character um or player feels that kind of ground to be like, yeah, my character in this situation is not going to do the thing that is mechanically optimal, but is going to do the thing that is narrative. We're talking about narratives, maybe I don't know, narratively optimal, and I just really liked that choice. Um,
I mean, this is related and unrelated because we were talking also about like like the party interactions and like
mhm,
they're giving them back and forth and what worked for the party and people were kind of just going along with it versus making character choices and stuff like that. But I feel like D&D in general, and this is why in there will always even I think even in some of the most like perfect games, there's going to be a little bit of this, right? Um, because with D&D, you are in a constant state of like walking a tightrope of social cues, but also you're playing like both real life social cues and pretend social cues, which is like
mhm,
a hard thing to do, especially because let's be honest, autistic people like D&D. There's a lot of us. Um, I think it's funny, but like so you're kind of in a constant state of like, is this an appropriate moment for me to make a character choice, or is this a very inappropriate moment for me to make a character choice? And should I just also follow along with what's being done? And so sometimes that just doesn't. Sometimes it pans out really well. Sometimes it's perfect. Sometimes it's like that was a weird moment for that, or like that didn't quite go the way perhaps people were hoping it would. Stuff like that. Um, so it's always satisfying when it does pay off, when like a character choice, because I love character choices,
mhm.
does pay off. However, there are plenty of moments where just for one reason or another, it doesn't play out the way that people were hoping, or it makes you as the DM kind of like, well, fuck.
Um, the only I'm not sure if I connect with that completely, but on the one sense, the kind of like way I do, I've noticed a thing with as a I guess storyteller. Um, when I am having an interaction as a character or as an NPC, and I think this is just good practice for players in general, is to try to make the scene as short as it can be while giving it the space that it needs to have. Um, which is um, a thing that I've noticed of because people like to talk. People like to talk as their characters, and the only reason I say this is just a consideration of um, other people's time, um, of trying to be concise because the sessions are so limited, and especially like I think also because me as a DM, I am always trying, not always, but like sometimes I have something that would be better to get to in a session. Um, and there's a series of conversations or things. And so, I mean, most of the time, I want people to like expand and like pad time out. But for players where they have like strong or very comfortable role playing and can role play not even seamlessly, but just kind of like very casually about things. There are some conversations I've noticed where it's like, okay, you could have ended it there. You made your point there. But that's just like a communication thing.
Well,
Um,
here's my thing about that. um, it's like you said, most people aren't storytellers. I, before D&D, all I do is write. All I do is write and read and watch things and pick apart the way they decide to communicate something with an audience. So I acknowledge to some extent that I am always viewing like media, even stories that I'm telling through the lens of like audience, even when there's no audience viewing it. I guess you could consider the other players. But the reason that I bring that up is that there's something really important that happens when you are storytelling in other capacities, whether that be in like TV, in writing, in anything like that, right? Um, that is like the concept of like making it, short, but making the point, giving it the space that it needs, and like the way that you decide to communicate something with an audience. And and so I spend a lot of time, like for example, like when I'm working on a book, when I'm deciding which scenes like make it into the final project, there's a lot of consideration on like um I can't include anything that doesn't communicate something important. And it needs to be like concise. It doesn't have to be like this, like literally like a perfect rant telling you exactly, but every bit of body language, the way a character decides to say, like the way they decide to say it, like it all needs to communicate something to the audience. And so I have a really good grasp on that, like when I'm writing and whatnot. However, like there is an aspect of like, especially there's some people who get really into their characters, right? And like you said, they can just like role play very seamlessly, and they have like a very good idea of who their character is as a person, and it's very real to them. And so like there is a, again, not that this is being communicated to an audience, and not especially in D&D, you don't really need to think about that as much. However, it's not as easy to like accurately perform that. Okay, how concise can I make this and make my point without suffocating it or giving it way too much? You know what I mean? um and like when you don't just do that all the time. You know what I mean? Because in one way or another, you and I are engaged in storytelling at like a fucking constant basis. You more with D&D, me more with writing. However, both a little bit with D&D still. Um, when you're not engaging in that a lot, and it's like a game or two, every week, like 3 hours a week, something like that, it's not an easy thing to grasp. And so as much as I'd like every single one of my sessions to be like this very like solid like storytelling beat, it's just not like really possible. And so I find myself focusing a lot more on like whatever it is that we are doing. I want them to just be having fun,
mm.
even if it's not necessarily hitting the beats that I wanted it to hit.
I think that's the thing that is the hardest to reconcile about my style of GMing, and specifically the settings with multiple groups, is that there is a difficult balance between just letting the players have fun and making sure that everyone across 8 campaigns every week is heading towards something and will get there at the same time. Because right now specifically, it was much easier in the beginning, but right now specifically, the week of April 14th. So that my weeks start on Fridays. Um, the week of April 14th, every single party will be in the same place. The week before that is a like grace week for me as a DM that just in my structure says heads to the meeting of the monarch. Um, but when you have a story that exists across 8 sessions a week, and in some cases, like last week and this week and the next week, we have three of those stories that are interconnected. Um, it becomes a thing that like a little gremlin in my brain who is the aspect of me that is like the control, because a lot of the time I do just let parties do whatever. Um, but the aspect of me that is a little control gremlin is like ringing a bell, being like, we have this amount of time left in the session, and these players are hitting this note, and it would be better for the story, and for the like connecting of characters if they're hitting this note. But it's also on me as a DM because there's a bunch of different ways to approach that. Like I think there was a scene between, it might have been you and Mashrak, or it might have been Narcisse and Mashrak last Wednesday, that um got to a point that I was hoping to get earlier in the session with like a group kind of thing. Because again, when you have uh, um 2 players from one game and 4 players from another game, I it's so hard to manage that amount of people, that it's the first thing you want to try to do is to just put everyone together and be like, you're all thinking about this thing. What's that scene that happens from that? And that worked. I think it's something that worked very, very well Sunday night, with the like 2 separations of the halves of the parties and what emerged from that, that I could have afforded to. And also, I didn't know, because Elijah, the elder, ended up showing up like late in that session
Mm-hmm.
and shook things up a little bit. But I what I could have tried to do with that session, because it was also a thing of like, not to call you out because you had a thing, or maybe you slept, I don't know. But you
I was
were,
late. Why was I late?
I don't remember. We don't need to focus on it. But you were late, and so I was also kind of had to stall that session to be like, this session is really starting when this other character gets here. Um but I
Because the
could have,
world revolves around surveil,
it does.
obviously.
Um but I wanted I could have just paired characters off, um and seen what those individual interactions were, because that's also the thing of, in this like vast collection of people and characters, is that the stronger sticking points I'm beginning to realize are the one-on-one connections. It's easier for these one-on-one connections to form between characters than it is for like 6 on 6 or 4 on 6, or whatever the numbers happen to be. Um,
Mm,
but yeah, I definitely like, um, and again, this also comes down to why I am designing a different system. Because I want the system to aid in the kinds of stories that I tell, or the style of storytelling that like um best fits a narrative structure, rather than a or some kind of narrative structure, rather than fighty hit structure. Like I want there to be tools within the game that prompt role play, other than make a persuasion check. Like that's all D&D has
mm.
really.
That's why like half the time that I'm running roleplay, it's no rules. uh, it just kind of more relies on like the way that characters say something or the weight, you know what I mean,
Yeah.
behind it. And of course, like you can. Ooh, this I feel like this is like a weirdly bitchy thing to say because I was gonna say, oh, you can kind of tell when certain players are not as comfortable or confident in the role
Mhm.
play, and so I do kind of toss them a bone and I go, yeah, role persuasion. But there's some people that I can kind of structure role play around what they actually just what they say, because they it's not even necessarily about like the confidence in which they say it with. They just have a very good grasp on like how to communicate certain things, you know what I mean, as a character. And so like for example, like when they say something in character, you know that that's what they meant to say and how they meant to say it. There's some people who when they role play, there's a sense of like this is the best way you know how to communicate what you're
Mhm.
trying to communicate. And I'm not going to just like put you at a disadvantage because you were not as articulate or sure of your character or like really strong with improv, like as like show and show is. You know what I mean? And this game has like a mechanic to make up for that. Um, and if I feel like, and I'll even like at times like that doesn't mean that I don't ever roll for certain people. They're still going to be roll, especially like depending on what exactly they're trying to convince somebody of or lie to them about. You know what I mean? Like that also like puts a big precedence on it. And I'm always also considering like who the character is, how they present themselves to like an NPC or somebody that we're playing with before I decide to make that decision. There's a lot of things that go into it. But there is a difference when it comes to like the people again, when they say something in character, that's exactly how they meant to say it and those are exactly the words they meant to use, and they have a very strong idea of who that character is and what they're trying to communicate. Other people, not as much. Um, and so like a lot of different considerations go into the way I decide to run role play or like convincing somebody of something or lying to somebody, connecting with an NPC, how much they decide to trust you, or how much weight they put in your words, how much they like you or dislike you. It just depends. Um, that being said, um, that's the style, the way that I DM, I think is oh, I just fully ripped my headphones from my ears. Um, I'm so loose with it, and I've noticed that like I knew this was going to be a thing. First of all, this wasn't like a huge surprise to me, but I'm so loose with the system. And I do there are like so right now I'm only running the two games. There is a party that I don't feel like I can be as loose with because I feel like it'll prompt confusion. You know what I mean? And then there's a party that I can be very loose with, and they like kind of immediately understand what I'm doing with that, why I'm doing that, how it benefits. You know what I mean? So it also again depends on the people that you're playing with and how they understand the game. Um, but at a certain point with it, eventually you get to a certain like number of games that like not being consistent like that can potentially become a problem. I've decided that's a problem for later Tucker that I just simply won't deal with right now. Uh, but I do imagine that like my inconsistency between parties will eventually like I'll have to kind of even out.
Mhm.
We'll see. We'll find out. But it's just like again, part of that is because I naturally in my home games and where I'm more comfortable is being super loose with D&D, like with 5e as a system,
Mhm.
as like kind of bullshitting as I go along and deciding things as I want to decide them. Um, yeah.
There is a rigidity to the mechanics of combat that I am real and specifically with magic that I is one of the main things I not even one of the main things I want to amend. It's one on the list of priorities. It's like lower, but in terms of the effort it will take to amend it is just a lot of work, which I've been working
Mm,
on. But like like I had a player was like, can I um so you can cast bless at a higher level or like bane at a higher level to um target multiple people, but there's no function for bane to cast at a higher level and it be stronger on one person rather than it being a d4, it's a d6, you know what I mean.
mm,
um and so I was already developing a kind of mechanic within the system that I'm making for that, and I've just started applying like those kinds of rules within my D&D games. Of like a player asks a question, and I was like, D&D doesn't accommodate that, but here's something that like kind of already works for me. That let's try this. Um, because D&D, it's really like it's I don't know, for if you are it's the first time playing a game, or even like you're casually playing a game, it's a great game. I don't want to take that away from it. It's easy to pick up. It's complex enough to have a lot of engagement with, but it's also just kind of limited. And playing Yeah, I have a bunch of thoughts. You mentioned, hmm, I remember what you mentioned. I'm just gonna say my response to it. One of the things I do in role play scenarios, um, to be a bit more loose with the rules of the game, for the most part, um, in not even non-tense scenarios, but for the most part, for like persuasion checks or deception checks, you just roll your checks, whatever. But specifically with my storytelling, I always have themes. I always have, especially with Folia, there's a very strong theme in Folia, which is a reflection on faith. And when someone presents the theme appropriately, and this happened a lot in the early days of the very first campaign, and there's this one specific moment where this one character, who unfortunately the player doesn't play with me anymore, his life got busy, or maybe he didn't enjoy the campaign, because we kind of had one or two stinker players in that game as well,
mm,
that are no longer with us, which is like few. But this one player had a really great moment where the party was attacked by these knights and they were defeated. And in the defeat, they had like the one kind of last living knight there. And they were like telling him, like, hey, like, by the way, like you are serving a corrupt person, and here are the reasons why. And both
mm,
sides begin to sound extremely compelling. And the a question comes up of like, how do I know I can believe you? How do I know? And the theme of this setting is that you don't. You have faith. The difference between the good people and the bad people in the setting is that the bad people try to force you to believe something, and the good people say, well, you'll have to figure that out. Um, uh, I'm not going to tell you what to believe. And so that's what the character did. And I was like, you hit it. You hit the thing. You did the thing. No roll required. That's an automatic success. He is on, like, I think even before that, they like just let him go. They're just like, do what you want. And it was like, yeah, cool, he's on your side. He's conflicted, he's confused, but like that is not how the other side works. And even then, he can travel with them back to the other side, and if things make more sense there again, he can flip it, right? Like he's free of consequences. There's no pressure for him to do. So that's like the theme of the setting, or one of the themes of the setting. And so like when players hit that success,
Mm-hmm.
why apply? Why have a chance of failure at that? Um, uh,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, there was a. Yeah, I'm gonna shut up actually.
Um, no, I think that's a really good example of the way that I feel about um just like I guess like when it comes to role play and the tricks and stuff. Although what you were saying about the magic system also really resonated with me, and that's another area where I just start to get really fucking loose with the rules. Is when it comes to the magic system. I don't run components. You
Yeah,
can use it
yeah.
for flavor text if you'd like. I by all means flavor text that bitch up. I'm never gonna ask you for the components to a spell. If it's like a particularly intense ritual, it's long. Like yeah. We'll still run with that. Otherwise, like I really don't like give a fuck about anything related
Well,
to that. But also, but not even just with that, but like with how certain spells work. However, that's just the fact that I have a gripe. I have a really big bone to pick with the way that certain spells are described and the way they work. And I am in a constant state of being really fucking irritated about it. Um, every time somebody's like, I cast sleep, I'm like, okay, so we're gonna sit here for 10 minutes and talk about the fucking way this spell works. Because every player that I've ever played with who like takes that spell, every like it gets just nobody I've ever played with immediately knows how that spell works. You know what I mean? And so eventually I'm going to start ignoring things and doing whatever I want. But again, that just doesn't work with like
mhm,
certain parties, you know what I mean? Sometimes
yeah.
there's not, it's just going to invoke like a deep sense of confusion. Um, and then with other parties, I can
The biggest
do
problem
whatever.
with D&D's magic system is the fact that a big portion of D&D is a gold farming game.
Yeah,
It is you go out, you get the money and you buy the thing, and there's nothing. I just don't like that. Like for
yeah.
Revivify, my rules for Revivify in my world are you have to have some kind of item that relates to your character's connection to their faith. Something that is meaningful and sentimental to them. And it doesn't get used. That is your focus for bringing people back to life. That the thing that whether it is your holy symbol or it's just another thing, it's the thing that like connects you with your faith the most, and the themes of that deity that allows you to bring a person back. That allows you to ask the question. And so with that, I ask any cleric the question: do you think your cleric can bring someone back? Do you think they can? Um, and sometimes, like one of my, I've talked about this person before, but I was his first DM, and immediately just great role player. And when I presented that to him, the answer was no. And it became a part of the game and the storytelling of like him asking this question: and how do I connect with my faith as this character to earn this right to bring people back? And so that, you know, yeah, is like a 300 gold diamond is such an arbitrary thing. I don't like that aspect of resource management of like, do we buy a diamond, do we buy a magic item, or do we buy a potion? You know,
Yeah.
I just, and like there are elements of like, you know, the um
I guess for me, is that the way that magic works, and I don't mean like the way that they, like, for example, when you go read, you open up the book, you flip to Druid, and you read the little like snippets it has about like what's a Druid. And they talk about like where its magic comes from. But then when you actually look at a lot of the spells, it really has fucking nothing to do with any of that. And again, it's like a lot of the components are like arbitrary. You know what I mean? That goes for pretty much every spell casting class. So a lot of that is very arbitrary. And if and this is something that I've done and that me and Jack have worked a lot on because we share this little world, which has been very fun for both of us. We're gonna go talk about that soon. Um, but what we've talked a lot about is like the way that the act of spell casting relates to the lore of the world and how magic actually works and where it comes from. You know what I mean? They
Mhm.
have to do with each other. They're inherently tied. It's not like, again, with 5e, where, like you said, some fucking diamond. What the fuck does that have to do with anything? You know,
It's
where did
worth
that come
300
from?
gold. What if the economy's like really good? What if there's a diamond mine nearby and diamonds are cheap? Do you have to buy, do you still have to buy 300 gold? You know, like continue.
But you get the vibe of like the big thing that we tried to do was
Mhm.
the way that we're using magic directly relates to the lore of the world, how it began, where magic comes from, how that works, and components don't really happen to be. But I feel the same way about like potions. What is that liquid? So tell me what the liquid is. I want to know. What is it made of? I want to know. And like, so I feel that way about a lot of things in 5e, and like the way the world works is like just feels like very disconnected. You know what I mean? For
Yeah.
example, in a lot of this is not across the board by any means. I'm using an example. I understand that there are a lot of other video games that do this. But in some video games, you get a health potion. That's just like a fucking health potion. It's just a health potion. Like, wait, where did it come? What is it made? I don't know. You found it in a crate.
Mhm.
I think I brought up Dragon Age as before as examples, the way that I relate to storytelling. I'm doing it again. You know why I love Dragon Age? Because I know that health potions are made of elf root. And you know why I love dragon? Because I know mana is actually lyrium, which is like a living, breathing like stone that helps fuel like like it has a very strong connection to the Fade and the way their magic works. And so I know when I'm taking this mana potion, it's not just some fucking mysterious fuck you liquid. You know what I mean? Like it comes from something this world. They've explained to me how it's mined and like the effects that it has on people and how people who are not spellcasters also use it for other things. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And so like that little stuff like that is very important to me. And I think about it a lot. And that's something that I don't like about 5e. Now I haven't done anything in my games to change it yet. I'm still like pondering that orb. I'm still
Mhm.
considering these things. But that's like another like one of those little things that kind of just like feels like like if I could look at the health potion, I'd look at the health potion in the eyes and I would say, you don't know what world you're a part of. You are so disconnected from the world that you exist in, you know?
Yeah.
Uh, and that's how I feel about magic and 5e sometimes in components is like there's that disconnect.
Yeah. I for me, this is just a general thought about magic in my world, and I can't fully explain the reasoning because the reasoning has to do with secrets that
Secrets.
I don't think there's one secret uh um or two secrets about the world that encompass a number of factors that I have not and might not tell anyone. The person who knows the most about the other secrets in my world, which there are many, is one of my home game players, and I might have shared similar information to you. about the role of mystery in the world, which is not for the podcast.
We did talk about
Um,
it one time.
yeah, but anyways, general thought on magic is that I I think everything is magic. I think fundamentally, instead of atoms, it's magic. And so I think that um for like casting ability, that is something inherent with every person. Every person has the potential if to cast magic or use magic. And it is just about learning how magic is expressed.
Mhm.
And for me, it's like the divine, the arcane, and like the natural, like the druidic. And those are the
Yeah.
three main avenues of magic. And there are other things that like over time I will develop more like with the system that I'm working on. But those are
Hmm.
three things that have overlap between each other, and um, fundamentally also for me represent different um, almost like worldviews, and
Mm.
have different functions on a large scale, or like how or like influences. So for example, like arcane magic, this kind of wizard stuff is inherently exploitative. It is lends itself to like fascistic ideals and capitalistic ideals. Um, that is the like um, what magic does, and in a sense, it, like um, also in the past few months, I've decided it is like cancer isn't a thing in my world, diseases are a thing in my world, but like arcane magic, long periods of exposure, I think do
Can't
cause
believe you
the
just made me have to think about if cancer exists in my world or not.
you
You said
gotta
that, and I was like, do people get cancer in my world?
yeah,
Is that a thing that
it's
happens to
when you start thinking about
people?
diseases and the purposes of diseases, there's a whole thing to go a rabbit hole to go down, which we simply don't have time. But yeah, magic
No.
is
I
like
would
our
love to eventually go down that hole.
yeah.
Slither inside of
Um,
it. I'm sorry.
it's all good. Arcane magic is it, like causes the like moral decay, I guess, of people, mortal and maybe moral. But anyways, I have a 6 hour long crossover in 20 minutes. But we'll
But
talk also on the yeah.
yeah,
Did you know
we'll
that?
talk after. I'm gonna try.
Yeah.
I have a lot of thoughts about everything that was just you just
Hmm.
like triggered. I was very tired, and you made my brain like, oh yeah.
I've put it
So
into
I'll
gear.
try to keep that in my brain
Hmm.
for when you're done with your
Come back
session.
with new thoughts. Okay.
You'll be
And I
tired
know
from your session. I'll be excited.
this has been, I should do this also, the Story of the Apprentice podcast featuring Jesse T. William and the apprentice Tunker Punkerson. Um, I'm going to stop the recording.